Hello, my name is Audrey Emron Beardsley. I'm an associate professor at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Linda Darling-Hammond, Stanford University, Charles E. DeComan Professor of Education, and also National Academy of Education member. Today we are interviewing her for the Inside the Academy show. The first part of the show, we're going to talk to Linda about how she became the person that she is. Where were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
In
those days, they called it the Mistake on the Lake.
Why is that?
It was badly polluted. It was a steel company, town, and there was just a gray haze of smoke and pollution over the city, and the dead fish were washing up out of the lake at that time. So yeah,
nice.
It was a challenging place.
Tell us about your schooling.
So I grew up in Cleveland, went to public schools there and in the close-in East Cleveland area. That was a time when all the federal policies in the 50s and 60s after Sputnik were coming into the schools. And so in retrospect, I was actually very much benefited by a lot of the policy of that time. We had the new math, which I loved. We had all kinds of interesting, innovative curriculum because there were all those curriculum reforms were going on. They were bringing equity initiatives into a variety of urban schools, and so there were a lot of opportunities like advanced placement courses were coming in, and a variety of other things were becoming more available. So I got a really good public school education. But I also saw the downside of a highly tracked system. One of my siblings, my brother, had a lot of learning disabilities and physical challenges. And we were in a system that was so highly tracked that they labeled each class 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, which is 7th grade, all the way down to the 13th level, and they were all different tracks, and he was in a very different part of the infrastructure than I was, and the quality of the education that he got was distinctively different. And I remember being very aware of that at the time and saying, why is that the case? Why do we have this system where some kids are being labeled in one way and other kids are being labeled in another way, and the quality of the experience that they get is very different? So on the one hand, I think I got some of the best offerings of public education in that era, and on the other hand, I think I saw the beginnings of the inequality that have concerned me since then.
Do you think that those experiences inspired you to become the person you are today and the scholar that you are today?
Well, I certainly think that they were the beginnings of my reflecting on what education is and what it ought to be, and it certainly has had something to do with the work I've done around redesigning schools and thinking about teacher development and so on. I also remember that one of my sisters had a teacher in first grade that was so awful that she was afraid to go to school, and I had to walk her to school and hold her hand, and then when we'd get close to me dropping her off at the door, she would start to cry. And this teacher threw things at the children and was just very abusive physically and verbally. And I think that was another thing that I was very imprinted by, and had the same question, well, why is it that you could have a school where the children are in this context where sometimes the teachers are not obviously working in their best interests. So I feel I was very affected by some key things that I noticed in the educational system. But I loved school. I loved going to school. I loved playing school. I always was the teacher when we played school. The other kids might say, well, let's go play house. And I'd say, okay, well, there's a school right next to the house. Can we play school and house?
Sure.
So I think that motivated me to be interested in education, but then I was also noticing some of the inequalities, some of the problems that exist in the system.
So when you were in school and people would say, what do you want to do when you grow up, what would you say? Do you remember?
Well, I thought I would be president like everyone else. I thought I would be a scientist.
I never thought I would be president.
You never thought
Just you.
you just have these random ideas that have no bearing. But I actually didn't think I would be a teacher until much later.
And then when was that? When did you turn towards teaching?
Well, I went off to Yale University, and that was a pretty unusual thing because I was the first person in my family to go off to college.
Okay.
I was in the first class of women at Yale, which was a very unusual time to be there. I went in intending to major in math and economics, completely unaware of what it would be like to be in a previously all-male environment that was not happy about admitting women. And many of the professors made that clear. And the math department was perhaps one of the most unwelcoming parts of the university. So after, you know, about a year of being there, and I did okay in my classes and so on, but feeling pretty marginalized in that context, I said, well, what else can I do that I like doing? And I said, well, I think I'll be a music major, because I actually had done a lot of music. I come from a long line of musicians, actually, most of them starving musicians who, you know, did various things. And so I majored in music, which, you know, that math music thing that a lot of people have. I definitely had that. And I minored in English, and that was a much more conducive department for women at Yale at that time.
So you did not get a degree in teaching and for your undergraduate?
I did not. I got a degree in music with a minor in English and a concentration in African American studies. And then I said, what am I going to do? And I was doing a lot of music. I actually, right after we finished college, I was in a production of Leonard Bernstein's Mass, which he directed and conducted as its world premiere in Austria, in Vienna. And if you ever see it on PBS, it comes on sometimes. I'm the person with the great big afro and the red pantsuit who's the blues singer.
Good to know.
I hope you don't see it. It's probably really embarrassing.
Now we'll be watching for it.
Right. It hasn't been on for a long time. So we were in Europe, and while I was there, there was a talent scout who came to see this production, and he asked several of us if we would like to join a bus and truck tour of Carmen Jones, which was touring around Europe. And I was very excited about this. I said, oh, wow, that'd be so cool, you know. So I called up home and I said, you know, should I do this bus and truck tour, you know, and launch my music career? And the response was, we have a lot of starving musicians, but you don't go to college to become a musician. You go to college to become a teacher, you know. You go to college to get a profession. And I had actually, while I was in school, I had been teaching in an after-school program at Yale called the Grant Foundation. And we worked with kids in New Haven, and I liked that a lot. And I was actually the little curriculum director for the English strand in the after-school program. And I had taught music when I was in high school. That was actually one of the ways I made a little bit of money. And I always liked teaching. And I saw a flyer on a bulletin board when I got back to the school, and it said, you know, come teach in Philadelphia. I didn't know anything about graduate school. There's nobody in my family or in my circle of acquaintances who'd ever gone to graduate school. So I didn't know how to think about that. And teaching was something I said, oh yeah, I really like to teach. I think I could do that. So I went to Philadelphia and enrolled in an alternative certification program, which was the Pennsylvania intern program, and began teaching. I did my student teaching in Camden, New Jersey during the summer. And like many alternate routes, I was placed in a school in the fall as teacher of record while I was still taking the classes for my master's degree. And that's when I became very passionate about both teaching and teacher education.
Were you placed in high needs, in the high needs area?
Well, yes, that was part of the goal. And I had done some substituting in Philadelphia. I taught in Camden, which was a very poor district, as a student teacher. But there was also 2 districts that were consolidating in order to desegregate. And they came into Philadelphia to recruit teachers out to go to this desegregating suburb. And so I ended up in this close-in suburb called Rose Tree Media for part of my placement. And it had a lot of high needs students, and they were trying to figure out what to do as they were combining these districts. But one of the things I really learned from that experience is how much you need to know to teach and how much I didn't know. And I remember very much thinking, how can it be that this teacher education program has not figured out how to organize the knowledge that I need as a high school teacher when I have kids in my classroom in 12th grade who cannot read, and I don't know how to teach them to read. You know, I had kids with special education needs. I had no training for how to really reach them. And while my kids liked me and my supervisors thought I was a good teacher and I enjoyed teaching and enjoyed my colleagues, I knew there was a lot more to know about teaching. And I was actually, I think, a little angry that the teacher education supports in this program were not what they should have been. There were other people, this is at Temple University, who were in traditional teacher education programs, and they were getting a much better training than I was. And I would talk to these other students and say, oh yeah, we learned about this, and we learned about this, and we're doing this, and we, you know, and my master teacher and my student teaching, and I'm learning all this. And I'm thinking, well, why are they learning all of this and I'm not learning any of this? And they're putting the people in this program into the neediest contexts, and we're not getting the good stuff. So that really, I think, inspired me to be concerned about the quality of teacher education and the access to knowledge that teachers get, which then has everything to do with the access to knowledge that students get, right? And it seems like a no-brainer, but our society has still, to this day, has a very hard time organizing itself to care about investing in the preparation of teachers.
So on that note, what are your thoughts about Teach for America based on your experiences in this school?
Well, you know, when Teach for America was first started, actually I had talked to Wendy Kopp when she was a student at Princeton. She came to visit me when I was at the Rand Corporation. I gave her a whole bunch of articles and so on, many of which appeared in her master's thesis later. And she came back and told me about the program she was going to create, by which time I was in New York. And I said, well, okay, so they're going to get a few weeks of training in the summer, and then they're going to go into schools. What are you going to do about, you know, ensuring that they get support and training and mentoring?
Which you experienced.
Right, because I'm immediately thinking, I've been there, I've done that.
And you're smart.
And I know a lot of people who have had this experience. Yeah, and I graduated from Yale with honors. I understand that doing that is not the same as knowing how to teach reading to a non-reader, or, you know, working with a kid who's autistic and so on. And she said, well, that's not our problem. You know, they're not going to stay in teaching. This is really a 2-year experience. It's really not our problem. So that concerned me. And I worked with Teach for America when I was in New York as much as I could, trying to help them develop a professional development program. But every year they replaced the head of professional development, and I began to both hear from Teach for America recruits and from some of my students at Teachers College who were principals and teachers in the schools and supervisors and so on, how much trouble these young recruits were having in the classroom and how they were floundering. And I was hearing horror stories upon horror stories about the experiences that they were having, both from them and from others who were trying to work with them and support them. So I saw not a lot of Teach for America teachers teach in, you know, and it was unfortunate that people so bright and so committed were not getting the supports that they needed to be able to be successful in the way that they needed to be. And I still hear from those people every year. I get calls and emails from people who are struggling in the classroom. So I remain concerned. It doesn't seem to me that we should have to make a bargain that says if you're smart, you won't stay in teaching and we won't train you adequately. That doesn't make sense. If we were thinking about this the way we think about medicine, as they did back in 1910 when the Flexner Report came out and medicine became substantially professionalized over the subsequent years, we would say, let's get the smartest people we can. Let's give them the best, most comprehensive, intensive training we can possibly organize for them, and then let's keep them in the profession. That would be respectful to children and to the recruits and to the education system.
And that's where we need to go, especially with the 2-year issue.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely where ultimately if we're ever going to make education and teaching a profession, if we're ever going to give teachers the knowledge and skills they need to be successful and build a cadre of really smart, sophisticated people in the profession, we've got to combine, you know, ability and dedication and commitment and talent with excellent training and with a career structure that intends to keep people in the career.
Sure, and really invest in them.
Yeah, and that's what every high achieving country does.